The prison isn't in the future, it's in the excess of future. You wake up already sprinting toward a life that doesn't exist. Your body's still in bed, but your mind is 10 miles ahead, solving, planning, calculating futures that may never come. It's not ambition, it's not preparation, it's a survival instinct gone rogue. You think you're preparing, but you're avoiding. Avoiding the unbearable silence of now. There's a strange comfort in imagining everything you'll do. Later, tomorrow, next week. When you feel ready, you rehearse conversations that will never happen. You visualize outcomes with perfect detail, and somewhere between fantasy and paralysis, you feel like you've moved, when in truth, you haven't taken a single step. This is how the addiction begins, not with pleasure, but with relief, the relief of not having to face the rawness of your current life, the boredom, the inadequacy, the silent despair that nothing is changing, even though your mind never stops spinning. You tell yourself you're being strategic, that it's important to reflect, that the vision matters, but deep down, you're not just anticipating possibilities, you're hiding in them. You're using the future as a shield against the brutality of being present, because being present means looking at the gap, the vast, unbearable gap between who you are and who you thought you'd be by now. There's a wordless pain that visits in the quiet hours, a dissonance. You want to live, you want to act, but every time you try to move, a new thought pulls you back. What if it's not the right time? What if I fail? What if I'm not enough yet? And so you stay, waiting, thinking, dreaming in high resolution, dying in real time. Schopenhauer once said, life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. And maybe your mind, without asking your permission, chose boredom, just to avoid the sharpness of pain. But here's the fracture you need to see. The thoughts you trust, the ones that seem so necessary, so logical, so deep, they might be the very net that's keeping you trapped. Not because they're false, but because they never stop, and they never arrive anywhere. You're addicted to a version of thinking that feels like life, but costs you your actual one. So let me ask you the question you've avoided each time you scroll, each time you overanalyze, each time you say, someday again. What if what's holding you back isn't the world or time or even fear? What if it's the unconscious pleasure of only thinking about your life without ever living it? You've done it 1,000 times, whispered to yourself, I'm going to, and felt a strange kind of victory. The sentence isn't even finished, but already your brain rewards you. A flicker of dopamine, a brief illusion of progress. You haven't moved, but something inside you sighs, as if you did. This is the drug of almost, the silent high of imagining change without enduring its weight. When you say you're about to change, to start, to try, the emotional circuits in your brain activate the same reward pathways as if the task had been completed. You feel accomplished for something that hasn't happened. You feel relieved for a burden you never carried. It's not laziness, it's not stupidity. It's neurology hijacked by a deeper fear. This is the lie no one talks about, that anticipation can feel more satisfying than action. Because action brings resistance, it brings imperfection, it brings exposure. But anticipation is pure, untouched, safe. You become a master of mental simulations, a professional rehearsalist of lives you never live, and slowly you begin to mistake that simulation for reality. You trick yourself into believing you're evolving simply because you're thinking about evolving. You confuse movement in your mind with movement in the world, but the more you think, the less you live. There's a paradox here. Anxiety feels like motion, like you're doing something, solving something, but it's a treadmill in disguise. You're running full speed inside your skull, and the world around you doesn't shift an inch. And yet, you can't stop. Because without that thinking, that fantasizing, that anticipating, you're left with a kind of silence you don't know how to survive. a rawness that feels like falling. So you reach again for the next thought, the next plan, the next vision of soon. You don't want comfort, you want escape, and thinking about what's coming becomes the perfect sedative. But here's the fracture. Living in the almost protects you from the possibility of failure, but also from the possibility of life. Because almost never arrives, it keeps you one step away from the present, one step away from the only place where change can actually begin. You don't fear failure, you fear presence. And so the cycle repeats. Think, plan, feel the false relief, and do nothing. Until one day, maybe too late, you realize that you've spent your entire life feeling like you're about to live, but never quite living. There was a time when thinking saved you. When the world felt too loud, too unstable, too full of pain, you retreated inward, into words, into books, into theories. Your mind became a fortress, a place where you could feel in control. But fortresses don't just protect, they isolate. Now thinking has become your reflex, your shield, your sedative. You don't feel things, you analyze them. You don't experience the moment, you dissect it. You don't act, you reflect endlessly. It's subtle. It looks like intelligence, sounds like depth. People even admire it. But inside, you know the truth. You're not thinking to grow, you're thinking to avoid. Avoid discomfort, avoid action, avoid the unbearable weight of emotional exposure. You've become so good at constructing symbolic futures, perfect plans, philosophical justifications, that you've forgotten how to simply exist in the chaos of what is. Overthinking is the cleanest addiction. It doesn't rot your teeth, doesn't leave bruises, but it steals your life all the same. You sit with notebooks full of clarity and hearts full of paralysis. You talk about healing, but nothing moves. You dream about becoming, but never become. Because every time the present demands you feel something, you run back to the safety of thought. This is where the intellect betrays you. The very thing that once protected you now imprisons you. You've turned your intelligence into armor, and armor, over time, becomes heavy. It restricts your breath. It numbs your skin. It prevents closeness, vulnerability, change. Sometimes your mind isn't the mirror of your soul. It's its prison guard. You may have convinced others you're just a deep thinker, but inside, there's a child who's terrified to feel again, who once felt too much, too fast, too young, and decided never to let it happen again. So you intellectualize pain. You strategize happiness, you schedule your healing, and all the while, the clock keeps ticking, and nothing real is touched. But beneath the sophisticated thoughts, beneath the elegant delays, there's a silence that knows you're not avoiding mistakes, you're avoiding the risk of being human, and the cost is everything real. There's a type of ego that doesn't scream for attention. It whispers promises. It tells you you're meant for something greater, that your potential is rare, that you're simply waiting for the right moment to explode. But the moment never comes, and you never question why. Because the ego has built its survival around that waiting. You've crafted an identity around the idea of who you could be, not who you are, not who you've become, but who you might become one day, maybe. And every time life asks you to move, to risk, to act, that identity resists, because to act is to expose the myth. To act is to find out if your imagined future can survive contact with reality. And maybe it can't, so you stay paralyzed. Not out of laziness, but out of loyalty to a fantasy. The fantasy of being special, the fantasy of being more than your circumstances, the fantasy that one day the world will recognize what you've silently rehearsed inside your mind for years. But here's the fracture. Every time you postpone action to protect your imagined greatness, you dig yourself deeper into the grave of inaction. You think you're preserving your potential, but what you're actually doing is starving it. And that hurts. Because you sense the decay, the slow erosion of meaning, the quiet rot of a life spent maintaining an idea. instead of living a reality. It's not that you failed, it's that you never gave your real self a chance to fail, or to rise, or to simply exist. You became the guardian of a future self that doesn't breathe, a projection, a ghost, and that ghost has started to replace you. Now every time you look in the mirror, you don't see a person, you see a delay, a paused life, a story waiting for the next chapter, without realizing the pages are already burning, because the longer you wait, the more the dream becomes your prison. And maybe, just maybe, it was never greatness you wanted. Maybe you just wanted to be free. Doubt used to be a form of intelligence, a way to question, to reflect, to avoid blindness. But somewhere along the way, it turned on you. Now it's not clarity you seek, it's escape through complexity. Every choice feels like a trap. Every path a risk, every decision a betrayal of another possibility. And so you stall. Not because you don't care, but because you care so much it breaks you. This isn't wisdom anymore, it's paralysis wearing a philosopher's mask. You loop endlessly. What if I choose wrong? What if I regret it? What if I'm not ready? The questions aren't real questions, they're strategies. Psychological smokescreens designed to keep you from moving. Because if you choose, something dies. A version of yourself, a possibility, a comfort, and somewhere deep inside you'd rather remain fractured than risk the grief of cutting away all the other lives you didn't live. So you elevate your indecision, call it depth, call it discernment, but it's none of those things. It's fear, refined, rationalized, and silently lethal. You convince yourself that constant analysis will eventually lead to clarity, but all it leads to is erosion. You don't arrive at the truth, you just wear down your will to move. The tragedy is that the longer you doubt, the more you forget how it feels to trust yourself. The more you delay, the more foreign action becomes, until even simple choices feel monumental. And that's how doubt becomes your identity, not a moment of reflection, but a state of being. You no longer want answers. You want the illusion of control that endless questioning gives you. But here's the fracture. Every moment you spend in theoretical futures is a moment stolen from the one you could actually live. Doubt doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees a different kind of suffering, one made of stagnation, silence, and slow inner decay. And still, somewhere inside you, the real danger was never choosing the wrong path. It was forgetting that life only begins when you dare to choose at all. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it strips. You sit in a room without noise, without screens, without plans, and suddenly the quiet becomes unbearable. Not because it hurts your ears, but because it confronts your soul. You thought you were avoiding distractions, but what you were really avoiding was yourself. In silence, there's no story to hide behind, no future to fantasize about, no conversation to escape into. There is only what is, and what's been buried, and it begins to surface. The itch, the restlessness, the memories you pretended to forget, the grief you intellectualized, the shame that speaks in your own voice. You feel the weight rise up, not all at once, but in fragments, like echoes from rooms you locked long ago. 10 minutes of real silence can feel longer than a year of noise, because silence holds a mirror, and that mirror doesn't lie. It shows you the places in yourself you keep renovating with thought, all the cracks you try to paint over with planning, all the grief you renamed as productivity, all the rage you silenced under logic. What you call overthinking might just be emotional avoidance in disguise. A sophisticated, socially accepted way to never feel what actually aches. And the silence knows. That's why it presses against your chest like a weight, not to punish you, but to return you to something real. Because feeling is not the enemy. The suppression of feeling is. You don't need more stimulation. You don't need more plans. You need presence, raw, unrehearsed, unfiltered presence, even if it shakes you, even if it burns, especially if it burns. Because that burning, it's the beginning of you coming back, not as a thought, not as a project, but as a body, a breath, a being that is finally here. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Not all self-sabotage is loud. Some of it sounds noble. I just want to get it right. I'm waiting until I'm ready. Now's not the right time. They seem responsible, mature, thoughtful. But underneath the surface, there's something else entirely. Hesitation dressed as humility. You don't say these things because they're true. You say them because they keep you safe. Safe from risk, safe from exposure, safe from the heartbreak of doing your best and still not being enough. You've crafted elegant sentences to justify your paralysis. You've built a language of delay, one that sounds wise, but only serves your fear. The mind is cunning. It knows that raw avoidance looks weak, so it wraps itself in good intentions. It uses beautiful words to build walls. It calls fear caution and stagnation preparation. And you believe it, because believing the lie is easier than facing what would happen if you didn't. But here's the fracture. You're not protecting your potential. You're protecting your illusion. The illusion that one day everything will align, that you'll feel certain, that your heart will be quiet and your mind will say yes. But life doesn't give those guarantees. It moves in fragments, in tension, in imperfect moments where nothing feels ideal. But everything is real, and real is where your life is hiding. Every time you wait for the right time, the present quietly closes its door, not out of anger, but out of entropy. Time doesn't punish you, it just continues without you. You think you're being patient, but you're practicing disappearance. And one day, you wake up, not in the life you feared, but in the one you avoided into oblivion. Because the words you used to postpone your life became the soundtrack of a life never lived. You keep thinking about what could happen, what you'll build, who you'll become. And it feels important, as if these thoughts are leading you somewhere, as if they're a compass. But maybe they're just a shield, a way to survive the unbearable weight of now. The mind, when cornered by emptiness, does something brilliant and tragic. It creates futures, glorious, perfect, untouchable futures. And it tells you that once you get there, everything will make sense. You'll be fulfilled, whole, seen. But the future is a drug, and you've developed a tolerance. Each new fantasy needs to be brighter than the last, each vision more complete, but none of them are real. They're blueprints for a life that exists only to distract you from the life you're afraid to feel. Because the truth is, the pain isn't in what you lack. It's in the space between what you live and what you expect. And that space, that silent gap between reality and ideal, is where your suffering grows. You wake up and feel like something's missing. But what's missing isn't out there. It's the connection between your body and this moment. This room, this breath. You've been so lost in projection that the present feels foreign, like something to get through, not live inside. You say you want meaning, but meaning doesn't arrive in the future. It's carved from brutal honesty with the now. It's born when you stop demanding that life entertain you, save you, or validate you, and instead begin to feel the rawness of your actual existence. No edits, no storyline, just what is. And maybe that's the thing you've been running from all along. Not failure, not rejection, but the terrifying possibility that this ordinary aching now is the only place you'll ever be real, and the only place where freedom can begin. By now, your mind is a cathedral of unfinished plans, a maze of thoughts chasing a future that refuses to arrive. You've filled notebooks, journal entries, endless internal dialogues, and still, something in you stays unmoved. Because the problem was never a lack of ideas. It was the presence of too many lies. Lies dressed as clarity, lies about what has to happen before you're allowed to begin. Lies that say you're not ready, that you must wait, that you must become someone else first. But that version of yourself, the one who's finally ready, is a mirage. a ghost projected by fear onto the future. And every time you chase it, you drift further from what's real. Overthinking isn't the pursuit of wisdom, it's the avoidance of silence, because in silence, you feel it. The things that have died inside you, the dreams you neglected, the version of yourself you abandoned to keep your fantasies alive. You sense the grief, quiet, unresolved, of a life paused too long. Schopenhauer said, "To desire is to suffer," and that's what overthinking is. Desire on loop, a craving for certainty in a world that offers none, a hunger for control in a life that only answers to movement. You don't need more visions. You need a funeral for the illusions that kept you safe, for the identities you wore to avoid risk, for the perfect timing that never came. What you need is a rupture, a break in the mental patterns that keep you orbiting a life you never touch. The truth is, you are not alone in this emptiness. You are not the only one who built castles in the mind while your soul starved in silence. You are not the only one who confused thinking with becoming, and you are not the only one who wants to stop. There's still time to step out of the projection, to let the future go, to meet the moment that's been waiting for you quietly this entire time, even if it hurts, even if it's now.